Welcome to Educator Insights. In our very first podcast, we will discuss how technology can help overcome the challenges in the life of teachers and improve learning for young children. So, welcome to today's episode. I'm your host, Husena Jadliwala from MagicBox, and our guest for today's podcast is Ben Cogswell. Ben is an educational consultant and kindergarten teacher at Bardin Elementary School. Ben, thanks for joining me and welcome to today's show.
Well, thank you so much, Hussein. I really appreciate being here, and I'm excited to chat with you.
Thank you for taking the time and joining us here. What would be a great point to start is if you could give us some background about how you got into your role at Bardin Elementary School and your journey since.
Well, I started wanting to be a teacher from, this goes way back, but I started wanting to be a teacher, I think, from a very young age. And I didn't know exactly I wanted to be a teacher, but I did know that I wanted to work with kids and be in the school system. And originally it was maybe a counselor or something like that. But I ended up in elementary school education. From long story short, I got my undergraduate in Stockton, California, and then I moved to Monterey, California, and got my master's there. And I met my wife, and so we just decided to stay in the area in Salinas, California. And so I started in an elementary school called Martin Luther King Academy, and I started out with overhead projector, which it's not that long ago, 16 years now that I've been teaching, but transparency films in the copy machine, writing on the overhead projector. And that first year we got a mounted projector in the classroom, and that was just amazing. And growing up in, I think, the 80s and 90s, I had always loved technology. But, back then we only had a computer lab. And so we'd go to the computer lab once a week. And, I really loved working at that school, but I had an opportunity to move schools in my district to a new school that was opening up with one-to-one devices with iPads. And I just kind of thought that would be a cool experience. So I went over there as a sixth grade teacher for 1 year and learned really how to experimented, lots of learning, I should say, in the beginning. And I learned a lot about implementing technology that year, and our district and a lot of districts were still new to implementing technology. And I guess I did an okay job because they asked me at the school to be the technology coach. And I said, sure, I'll give it a try. Why not? I'll try to be a technology coach. I never imagined leaving the classroom. And then a year after being the technology coach, the superintendent came and asked me, hey, would you be willing to be a technology coach for our whole district? And so I said, well, I guess, sure. I got to, build a program across the district and work with a lot of teachers, training them with technology. And about 3 years later, I was ready to go back to the classroom. And as I'm sure you know, there's a big difference between sixth grade and kindergarten. And so I tell people, like, I went from sixth grade to kindergarten, and people are like, wow, did you do a bad job at your role? Were they trying to punish you? Because that's such a drastic grade change, right? But I really wanted to, from all my experience with technology, I felt a big kind of push in the lower grades. And my children, I have 4 children, and that just loves their enthusiasm at that time, just for life and for learning. And so I took it kind of as a double challenge. And triple challenge, actually, because as a sixth grade teacher, I saw a lot of kids with lots of gaps in their education. And so I'm like, well, number one, let's try to start them from the bottom and get them up right. Number two, let's see if we can implement technology in a really meaningful way that's developmentally appropriate. And number three, just, that age and excitement for learning. And so that's pretty much trying to consolidate a very long journey into maybe a 2 to 3 minute story. So that's kind of how I got into my current role at Bardin, and I've been teaching there for about 5 years now.
Wow, that is quite a story. Thank you for sharing. And some parts of the story really resonated with me. There was overhead projectors and going to the computer lab once a week. It's crazy if we think about how far technology has come from that time till now, and what the kids are seeing in the classroom right now. It's so different from what we did and what you saw at the beginning of your career as well. And congratulations on being so adept at getting your hands on technology and learning to teach with them. It's not very easy. I think for any teacher, you already have a lot to do, and then to learn new technology can always be tough. But what you did say about using technology to teach children in a meaningful way. That's exactly what this is about. And I think this is a good point to just kind of get your insights about maybe a time when you specifically saw a positive impact of technology on a child's learning.
Well, I remember that's a great question. I mean, there's always these moments, right, where you see, but I just remember my first year in kindergarten, I had a mom come up to me about maybe about 3/4 through the year. We were mostly through the year, and mom said to me, at the beginning of the year, I was really worried about using all this technology and how much you were doing in the classroom, and then I slowly realized how much it was helping my son learn. You don't often get, I think, positive feedback all the time in the classroom, whether it's from parents or students, more from kindergartners, right, than you do from sixth graders. But just hearing that mom kind of say, like, just those words, right? Like, I didn't think that this technology was going to help my son. And now I can see, what it's doing to assist his learning. And I guess it wasn't necessarily like anything magical of what I was doing, other than the fact that I guess just kind of, maybe some people would say differently, but just kind of making sure to leverage it for, differentiation and creation, and making sure that, it's helping with their engagement. So I just feel like, that's kind of a general time, but it's just amazing what that parent said. And just quickly adding on, I mean, I get my kindergartners, they use an app called Seesaw, and I don't know if you're familiar with Seesaw.
Yes, I am. Yeah.
But it's for those people that are listening that might not be. It's a learning tool. It's an online portfolio where you can kind of push assignments out. Kids can record, kids can draw. It's super simple and very powerful to use. But I just love hearing my students record their thinking and just some of the insightful things that they can say when you give them the opportunity. Right. Because when they're recording, it's like nobody's listening. So you kind of never know what might come out of their mouth. And so it's just magical also just hearing those, whether they're reading a passage, reading a sentence, explaining their thinking with a math concept.
Yeah, and that's a great way to put it. I feel like when a student's given the space to kind of share their thoughts, it gives you a better insight into understanding how they're thinking about a certain concept that you're teaching in class as well. So, it's really powerful what a tool like that can do. And you mentioned about the not expecting the parent to say what they did. And that brings us to another point, which is especially important in early childhood education. There's a lot of, talk about, is technology so necessary in early childhood education? Should we be uh, getting students on screens so early? Is it good for them? So, what are your thoughts about the use of digital technology in early childhood education?
I think so. It's going to be different. This is a question back for you. It's going to be a little different for you. But if you think about like a traditional classroom, and I said, kids are using, thinking maybe with, not your non-ed tech educator lens, which may be hard. If I said, what is a traditional classroom with kids on computers? What are you imagining?
I guess there would be less interaction between the students, right?
Maybe like a quiet classroom where kids maybe
Mm-hmm.
have like headphones on and they're clicking buttons, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe doing some program. And I just think that, there's a lot of fallacies of how technology is used in the classroom. I mean, some of it's true. Sometimes teachers sit, kids down, and there's some programs that kids can do some really good learning on. But, for example, if you were going to walk into my classroom and you're going to see technology, right, you're going to see kids engage. You're going to see kids talking. You're going to see kids creating. I think everything, especially for the lower grades, everything needs to be in balance, right? I once had a colleague that came up to me because he used a lot of technology, and they said, "You must not use any paper. You must not go to the copy machine at all." And, I'm probably one of the people that's there, like at the copy machine the most, because, kids need paper, right? They need to learn how to write. They need
I
to have
agree.
practice their penmanship, right? Cutting, gluing, hands-on manipulatives, all those things are important. But kids are different. Kids are growing up different nowadays. I mean, you walk down the street. This is what I kind of find odd too. You go to a restaurant, and this doesn't happen with all parents. It's kind of a roundabout way. You go to a restaurant and a kid is crying, and so what happens? What do you think the parent does a lot of the times nowadays? Kids crying in a restaurant at dinner. What happens? So what I see is kind of going back. I feel like a lot of times, my point is, I guess, when parents are often handing kids phones, right? And what does the
Right,
kid
right,
do on the
yes.
phone half the time, right?
Yeah.
They go play a game and they're in a video. And so that's part of the reason I think that parents imagine kind of sometimes this same thing, and even other educators, right? Technology should be used for kids to demonstrate what they know. For getting kids, for me,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they should be interacting. They should be creating something. Maybe they're drawing something. Maybe they're writing, something. Maybe they're explaining a math concept. Um, when instead of just having kids just sit there and click on buttons, to me, like, okay, well, we love paper. Let's use it in the classroom. Let's do our writing on our paper. Let's hold our paper up. Let's take a picture of our paper. And now let's record ourselves reading it. It adds a level of practice, right? We think, again, a classroom, when kids are sharing, and I know I'm asking a few questions and maybe I'm getting my point around about when kids are sharing with each other in the classroom, it's a traditional classroom practice. How many kids do you perceive sharing at one time in a given classroom? What percentage would you say? Turn to your partner and share.
Yeah, I guess it wouldn't be a very high percentage if they're on their devices.
Well, maybe let's say they're not on their devices, right?
Okay.
Uh, and so about any time kids are talking to each other, which is a good
Mm-hmm.
skill to have,
Yes.
50% of kids are sharing, right?
Okay, yes. That would be
So 50%. So now let's send them to their computer and then let's have them go record, right? Okay, I want you to, here's this triangle. I want you to go and hold this triangle and explain yourself, make a video, hold up the triangle, make a video, record yourself explaining the triangle. Now, if every kid has a device, what percentage of kids are sharing?
100%.
100%.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, so it's like it's just simply opening a device and hitting the record button. I think the way we look at technology and we think about implementing technology in the classroom is more of a traditional way, right? Like when we picture kids in a computer lab, like we talked
Yes.
about earlier, they sit in the computer lab, maybe they do a program for 30 minutes and they leave. And that's what I think a lot of people, and that's why for me, technology, it's a tool. Let's
Right.
use it, right?
Yeah, and you made a good point there about maybe parents, specifically parents, not really understanding how that might work in a classroom separately from how it's at home. Because when these parents were in the classroom, it was a different time. It was a computer lab time. And that's how they're imagining technology being used for their own kids in the classroom as well. But I remember reading a quote that something like, you cannot raise your children the way your parents raised you, because your parents raised you for a world that no longer exists. And that's exactly what you said as well, that technology is part and parcel of life now. And kids in school need to learn how to use technology from early on, unlike at our time, because it wasn't as prevalent in daily life, but now it is, and we need to equip our children for that. So that said, you did mention Seesaw as a good example where students are actually given the space to share their thoughts and all of that. But what other tools do you use to teach your students? And what are some challenges, or what are some things that are great about them?
Well, for me, with young students, one of the most important factors to any tool that I'm going to use with young students, and I feel like this goes for any students, is simplicity. Are the buttons clear? Like, can kids get to where they need to get without too many clicks? How much reading? Accessibility features. Is there things being read to them? How much reading are students going to have to do? How are the icons differentiated? Is this icon this color? Like, oh, if they're going to start, is it green and the stop button is purple? I think there's a lot of thought that needs to go into when you're picking tools. So I really kind of go by this whole notion that kind of like less is more. And I really start off for the majority of the beginning of the school year. I simply start off with just using Seesaw and really getting students to kind of master that tool. And as we progress, because there's so many things you can do with that. As we progress, I start using some other tools. And some of these are more like formative assessment tools, which you can use for your instruction. And so I love some of my favorite formative assessment tools for the younger kids is I have about 4 of them. One of them is an app called Quizzes. And I love it because I can record audio or I can put images in there and then students can respond. For example, I can record myself saying like, this is the word cat. And then students can look at the response and find the word cat, right? Or this sound is ah. And then students have to find the A. Look It is another fun game where students really enjoy kind of the same thing, building these kind of assessments, or not even just assessments. It's also just practice, right? Building kids' fluency. Look It is another extremely fun formative assessment tool. The two other formative assessment tools I like to use. Sometimes there's one called wordwall.net and 99 Math, and all of those I like because we can do an activity, for example, like, hey, we're going to practice addition on paper, and let's going to do this activity, and then I can design my own formative assessment that mirrors the paper activity, and so those are the tools, honestly, I use the most. There's some other ones depending upon what's going on in the year, the time of year. I know I would love to be able to use it more, but we don't have access to it right now in our district. But I know Scratch Junior, I would love to be able to get my students to have access to that, because that's a great also tool for some early readers. And I some of it, of course, depends. We have touchscreen Chromebooks. And so, that also depends on some of the tools that I might choose in my classroom. But those are definitely some of my favorite tools. And I guess, again, just restating, it's the simplicity that I can get students to participate in their learning in a very active way.
That's really awesome. And I was a little silent there because I was actually writing down these tools as you mentioned them, just for my knowledge as well. And I have heard a lot of a lot of these tools. I've used Scratch Junior as well. Learning programming at an early age is also something that's really important, because programming is logic, and it just teaches kids to think with that type of clarity from a young age. So I think that's a good point. And all the formative assessment tools that you've pointed out, making formative assessment less daunting helps students kind of share their understanding a little bit better, right? And these tools kind of help with that. Sometimes if a student has that fear of assessments or exams, having it in such a formal way can be daunting for them. And using these type of formative assessment tools online, where technology makes it seem less scary, I think it's really helpful, especially for children at such a young age, for sure. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And we spoke earlier about, sometimes there being a bit of pushback against using too much technology in the classroom. But, researchers have found that digital activities do lead to significant increase in engagement in the classroom. And you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but if you could give us more insight into how you might incorporate technology into your daily lesson plans in various activities to make learning fun, engaging, and interactive for your young students. Now, just to add on to this question a little bit is, you mentioned about the importance of doing hands-on activities, making sure that they are practicing penmanship, they're able to cut and glue. How do you sometimes put these hands-on activities together with some activities that might need technology? Like, how do you incorporate both together?
That's a great question. And I really like blended learning. And so
Mm-hmm.
when I think about blended learning, I personally use two terms. And one of them is, the term digital, and the other term analog. I don't like to say like paper and computer, because like in kindergarten, right, like you use a lot of, for example, analog tools, right? You use a paper, you use a pencil, you use like little teddy bear manipulatives, you use linking cubes, right? You use scissor, use glue. I think all those tactile things you're going to use, I feel like I like to put in the category of like analog tools versus, digital tools, which could be a computer. It could be like a robot you could be programming. And so I share those because I really like to design my lessons around those. And so I think it's important, and I haven't seen a curriculum. A lot of times I see a curriculum, and I digress from the point, but a lot of curriculums that I see designed by companies, they have like an analog portion, and then the digital portion is like supplemental, right? And it's not it supports it, but it's not really meant to be designed like to be taught like together. Or on the other hand, there's some digital tools, right, where they have a majority of their component online, and maybe the analog tools are supplemental. I really believe we need to make these tools not supplemental, to each other. So, for example, when I think about a lesson, I always start with a standard. Like, what standard am I trying to teach? So let's talk about a math lesson. Right now, we're working on subtraction, right? And so one day I might give the students, for example, some linking cubes, which are just little cubes that you kind of connect. They stack onto each other. They're a little bit like Legos, a little less fancy. So I might give some students linking cubes. All right, students, we're going to have 10 linking cubes. And I want you to break off 4 linking cubes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's count. Let's break it apart. How many linking cubes then do you have left? All right, 6. You got it. You have 6 cubes left. So, we have more of the concrete. Maybe the similar activity on paper. They draw 6 objects or 10 objects and they cross out 4, right? So we like to have that concrete, but then we can there's a few ways we can take those same activities, to the computer. Number 1, like I talked about earlier, let's take those 10 cubes, right? Let's break off the 4. You have 6 cubes left. Compare it to your partner. Did they take off 4 cubes? Did they take off 6 cubes? Did you use the same amount? How many are removing? How many do you have less? Is it the same? Have a discussion with your partner. Good. Did you have that discussion? Did you talk about maybe a number sentence you could write? All right, good. I like how you did that activity. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get out your computer. And what I would like you to do is record yourself explaining how you demonstrated subtraction by having the 10 cubes and removing the 4 cubes. All right? You ready to do that? Just go ahead and explain it to me the best you can. So if you look at that example, all really we're doing is when you think about using technology, it's not really the focus of that lesson, right? The focus of that lesson is getting the students to be able to explain their thinking. They explain it maybe first before even to the partner, to me, the teacher, then they explain it to their partner, then they're doing the same thing on the computer. Right. So it's allowing them to use these tools, both those digital and analog tools, what I say at the same time. I call this like a three-dimensional task, because literally all the kids are doing is recording and explaining their thinking. Right. It can be done. Same thing. You're doing work on a whiteboard. You write a problem down. You write I want you to go write this sight word sentence down. And then you're going to go and hold it up. You're going to take a picture and then you're going to read your sentence. And so it's just this whole idea that not everything that we're doing with students needs to be on the computer screen, right? We can take manipulatives, we can take it off screen, we can just do videos and we can interact in that way. And so that's kind of one way I like to support learning. The other way is like same kind of idea as doing that subtraction activity, for example, where they're using the manipulatives first. And then maybe they might go and do an activity where they're dragging in that I've created where maybe they're moving things around. So, okay, there's 10 cookies on a tray. I'm going to have you take some cookies and I'm going to have you drag them off the tray. How many cookies are you going to drag off the tray? 4. So how many cookies do you have left? And as you're moving these cookies, I want you to explain what you're doing. And so I really try to have activities that are not supplemental to each other, that the activities that support each other. So whatever they're doing kind of analog, then they're going to see the same standard or a very similar task with their digital. And so they're really used to support each other, those tools. And I believe, especially in the younger grades, they need that balance of analog and digital. And sure, as even in the older grades, as it grows up, I still think there's a lot of benefit to using those analog tools because I know, like in high school, maybe a lot of what they do is on their computer. And how can we kind of take them off the screen a little bit?
Yeah, and I fully agree about, having that visual, having that manipulatives in your hand, and seeing it before you go into an abstract version of the same concept. It's so important to help students, help whether they are young or whether they're in high school, kind of have a better memory of it in the future. There's so many concepts that a student learns, especially in math, as an example, through the school year. And it's so important to have some things understood in a way that it just lives in their brains, and giving them that opportunity to do so with something hands-on first, and then bringing it back to a digital way, whether it is recording their understanding the way you mentioned it, or perhaps even completing some formative assessments, for example, on your tool after that. You're linking both together. I think that's the point you're trying to make, that both work together and not and it's not that one is the reason the student understood and the other is just kind of like a word that you use, supplemental. So I like that. I like that idea, and we really should think about having more of that in school. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. You did mention one activity over there where, you're using the linking blocks and then recording your thoughts after that. But have you ever had a time where you actually had a technology-based activity or project, and if you can share an example of a successful one that your students completed?
So yes, we have like many. I think a lot of it is, I feel like in kindergarten we don't necessarily do as big projects, although that's always a goal for me to kind of move forward, and start getting them to do those. But I think for me, some of the ways I just love, I like technology. And again, this isn't necessarily as much of a project, but one of my favorite things that I use technology for is, for example, differentiation. Let's take, for example, my students, their goal is to learn 100 sight words by the end of the year. And as you can imagine, do you think all students learn all those sight words at the same rate?
I don't imagine so.
Right.
Yeah.
So right now, I mean, honestly, I have students right now that are on their set of, I think, 200 to 300 sight words. So they've already learned 200 sight words, right? I have students that are still on level 1, that are still really struggling just to learn those first 10 sight words. Not very many, but they're still there. So I love technology because it allows me to provide differentiation. Again, not as much of a project, but it's the way that they're allowed to interact. And so, for example, I have a formative assessment quiz where students first, what they do is they get their sight words out, which are, of course, are little flashcards. I recorded myself a video of myself kind of reading the flashcard. Students can find the same flashcard as me. Okay, get your red flashcards out. Let's go ahead and read those flashcards. And they do it with me. We do it together. They're able to practice it. And then on that same slide, they're able to click on a link and go and take a formative assessment quiz based on those flashcards that they're working on. And the great thing about the formative assessment quiz is it gives them instantaneous feedback. So it says,
Right.
this is the word the, right? And then they have to find it. And so I love that because every student in the classroom gets to be where they need to be with technology, right? I can't go and work with all of my students at once on the level that they need to be as a teacher, right? I can do some small groups. I feel like every student kind of being on the level they need to be. It's definitely more challenging. And so like an activity like that is so amazing because it allows students to be where they need to be. And so definitely, that some of the projects I'm completing, are a little smaller. And so that's why I kind of hesitate to do projects. But, just another really fun activity that students love is a story retelling. And so I'm sure you're familiar with the story of the Three Little Pigs.
Yes.
And so for example, in Seesaw, what we can do is we can give them a background and then we just kind of put some images in there of three little pigs, a big bad wolf, and some houses. And then the students can basically move the characters around as they're recording and they can do a retelling. And it's just amazing hearing, seeing them create their own little videos. Again, it's a 3-minute video of maybe them doing a retelling, and it can be done with any story as long as you can kind of do in the manipulators. And the great thing is, again, every student has access to those things
Right.
at one time. And so those are just not, again, necessarily as big of projects, but always my goal to kind of get students to interact. My next goal is to kind of get them to start creating videos, but I got to find the tool that I really want to use for my kindergartners that makes them do more of the work rather than me kind of carrying the brunt.
That makes perfect sense. I really agree with you when you said, especially about the differentiation part and using technology to help with that. You have so many students in a classroom. How can you make sure that you're personalizing a learning journey for a student? It's easy to talk about, but it's not as easy when you're in the classroom with your students. How do you make sure that the student at level 1 is getting enough support and the one at level 3 is also getting enough support to continue their learning? Because either one might get bored if they don't have the right support, right? So, and technology can really lend a hand with that. there's the concept of exit tickets, right? At the end of the lesson, at the teaching of a concept. And you've mentioned some tools that you use for formative assessment in general as well. Um, would you say, like, uh, do you use these tools to also help you assess and evaluate student learning and progress and help you make better decisions in your classroom? Maybe some of these tools have analytics or something like that. Is there anything that you would share with our listeners that you feel like might be useful for them to also check out?
Well, all of those tools I think are great. I think some of it is not just the tools, but for example, how you're using the tools, right?
Mhm.
So one of it is this whole notion that previously, students would take a test, and I think some of this has changed. They take a test, they complete the test, and then their grade, that's the grade they get, right?
Mhm.
Because teachers necessarily they don't have the time to make another copy or grade the test again, right? But all of a sudden, we have some of these online tools where we can create tests, and right, we can mix the question order, we can mix the answer order. And now, what if we said, I want you to take this online quiz? We're going to take it, and I'm not going to take your lowest score. I'm going to give you multiple opportunities, and I'm going to take your best score. So part of it is thinking about when we have these tools, it gives us the option to give students multiple chances to succeed. The other thing is really using some of these assessment tools. There's some strategies called edu protocols, and there's one edu protocol that's called the Fast and the Curious. And so what happens is the Fast and the Curious is you use these formative assessment tools to drive your instruction. So think about it as a pretest. I want to teach my students blends, right? Blue, cur. And so I give them a quiz, and they take the quiz on blends, and their first score comes out, and the score is 60%. So I look at the questions they mix the most. I teach them right away, all right, the 6 questions that they really need help with, let's go ahead and do a quick review. Let's practice them. Let's take the quiz again. What's you think going to happen to the score?
It should go up.
Hypothetically speaking, right? If I do a good
Yes,
job teaching. So it goes up
yes,
a little bit, right? Still need some
yes.
more practice. The next day, I do the same quiz. I look at the questions they missed the most. I have the students take the quiz again. What do you think is going to happen to the score?
Again, because I guess what your point here would really be that because you're focusing on the stuff that they don't know, right, and helping them get to where they need to be, it should again improve their scores, right?
Yeah, and then also through the repetition, it's kind of maybe, and this
Yes.
doesn't work with this is more of things that you need fluency, vocabulary, letter sounds, some of those things that take more fluency development and practice over time, but it also transfers from short term to long term memory. So if you think about,
Exactly.
your traditional vocabulary where you do like day 1, let's do a word search. Day 2, let's review the definitions. Day 3, let's do this. Now, if you kind of repeat this same cycle, maybe by day 4 in a quick period of time, kids are going to have mastered those words.
And I am totally agreeable with you about repetition. I know there's a lot of sometimes there's pushback about that as well, about having too much repetition of something or practicing something too much that it becomes memorization. But that's not necessarily true. The more you practice something, the more it commits to your memory. That's true, but it helps you understand as well.
Especially because, for me, if you gave me the paper quiz and you had the same questions in the same order, I was one of those kids that would just be able to look at the quiz, the question, and be able to kind of know it in my brain, right?
Right.
Versus now with some of these tools, we can randomize the question order and we can randomize the answer order, right?
That's so true. Exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that as well. We are reaching towards the end of this session, but I just wanted to quickly ask you, um, you know, you seem to know a lot about different tools, and you've mentioned before that you were a technology coach, so I'm sure you've had a lot of exposure to a lot more of these things. But how do you keep up? The way technology changes these days. How do you keep up with the latest technology trends in education and try to integrate them in your teaching? And also, how do you also provide this information to parents so that they can kind of aid their child's learning at home as well?
I think just some of it is, for example, like an app called Seesaw. Every time the students, if I hook up the parents in Seesaw with their, their email, their phone number, every time the students complete an assignment, then the parents can be notified and they get to see their students' work.
And
Um,
do you find that parents actually engage and listen and perhaps even come back to you with what they heard?
Sometimes but definitely more at the beginning of the year.
Okay.
Right, definitely more
Yeah.
at the beginning of the year, but you still have parents that, as the year progresses, they still you can see because it gives you all the analytics on if parents have seen,
Mm-hmm.
if they have seen it, if they haven't seen it, right? It gives you all those analytics, and so it's just that such a great tool of immediately letting parents know where their kids are at, and plus, it's when you're doing like conferences, you can show this is where your kid was at in the beginning of the year, and this is where they're at, and just being able to send messages to them so quickly is very handy. So I think just kind of those messaging apps and the fact that a lot of my parents speak a different language, and I can send them a text in one in English, and if as long as it's in like a typing message format, right, rather than like a PDF, it will translate it to the language on their phone.
That's super helpful as well, of course. Yeah.
Right, and so just
Yeah.
it definitely has helped with parent communication, and parents kind of knowing where their kids are at and how they're doing.
Yeah. And that's so important. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that as well. Um, yeah, so as we wrap up, just for the benefit of our listeners, what are your top three tips for incorporating technology in the classroom for, let's say, for a teacher who hasn't really tried this so much?
So I think that top three tips is the biggest thing is start simple, right? Especially pick one tool and get kids to learn that tool well, right? I think sometimes we move from tool to tool to tool to tool, and kids kind of lose that. They don't get to be masters of the tool, right? And so I think just kind of start simple with one tool. I also I think get kids to create whatever you're doing, right? Don't just get kids to consume things online. Don't get them just to watch videos or get them to, um, just do programs where they're pushing buttons. Get them to create something. Get them to record something because that's really going to show their learning, and it really helps them, especially when they're recording it. It helps them build language. And then this other thing is be patient because the technology is not going to work. Sometimes it's not going to work, right? And so sometimes people give up and just understanding it's not working today. Let's put it away and try it again tomorrow.
These are great tips, Ben. Thank you. Especially the last one about patience. It's sometimes difficult to be patient, especially in a classroom when your students are looking at you, but you have to try and try again. Technology doesn't always work. That's entirely true as well. Well, for those listening in, I hope these tips were useful for you. We would love if you could also share your own experiences and ideas for using technology in the classroom. You can do so on social media and tag us hashtag Magic Educator Insights. So, Ben, thank you so much for joining us today for our very first Educator Insights podcast. We really appreciate your insights and we look forward to you and our audience joining us in future podcasts. To our listeners, please leave a review for us and tell us more about topics in EdTech that interest you. Have a great day.